So I thought I'd talk about our recent trip to Tohoku and a little bit about it. I thought it'd be interesting to give you guys a little bit of familiarization of Japan if you're not. I don't know have you all ever been here, Frank? You've been to Japan, right?
Nope,
No, Larissa, you?
all new.
No?
No, but I would like to. Someday it's on my bucket
Yeah,
list.
okay, so this is the sort of overview of the major parts of the country. There's like 1,000 little islands, but this is Kyushu. This is the southern island. This is where Junko's relatives originally came from, and we like to go here. This is Honshu, the main island, which is most of Japan. This is Shikoku. I've never been here. It's an island mostly of pilgrimages. And this is Hokkaido, where Junko's from. So we both flew into Narita, which is the airport outside Tokyo. Haneda is actually the Tokyo airport. It's much closer to town. And then we got Junko flew to Chitose, and I took a bus to Haneda and flew to Akita, which is here. So the main problem is that ANA, the airline that's United, this part that's in with United, only flies to most Japanese cities out of Haneda, so I was concerned about catching this bus. I had a very short, tight connection. And this 787 looks like it's a problematic airplane. The first one, couldn't fly because electrical failure somewhere. They got us backup. It took an hour to decide if it could fly. So I got there 2 hours late. Unfortunately, there was one last flight. So I managed to get on that and go over to Akita, where Junko was already there, and take the bus to town. Got there at 10 o'clock at night. So it's a long day traveling. So our strategy was that we would start driving in Akita because Junko is going to be driving, and she rarely drives in the US even, and they drive on the left-hand side of the road. So the idea was to meet here because there's nonstops from Chitose to here and from Haneda to here, and start driving from here and have minimal traffic, which worked out great. The trip was in Tohoku. Tohoku is this part of Japan. It's visited by less than 1% of tourists. And frankly, we're very motivated to avoid tour groups, especially Chinese tour groups. Chinese tour groups are the worst people in the world. I've actually had to leave museums because of them. That they shout at the top of their lungs, they spit on the floor, blow their nose on the floor, and push you up against the displays, crowding you up. So we only saw two Chinese tour groups. It was no problem to us. But the main idea was right now, Japan has a problem with overflowing tourists. And most people go to Kyoto, which is here near Osaka, or Nara, which is up in here, or Tokyo, which is here. So this worked out great. And we started in Akita here and drove around the top of this island up into Amori, down into this prefecture, down through here, and finally ended up at Sendai, and then went to Junko's sister's house for a couple days down here near Fukushima.
Hey,
So
Charlie,
yes,
the green hash line, is that the train?
that's the train. That's the
Now,
Shinkansen train.
now is that a tunnel that goes up to the
No,
island?
yeah, it's a tunnel. By the way, driving in here was driving in this part of Japan was like half tunnels on the highway. I mean, there were tunnels 3 kilometers, 4 kilometers long. I mean, you come out of a tunnel and go into another tunnel, and but this is the high-speed train track that dash.
Gotcha, yeah, I assume that's what I meant.
The Shinkansen train. There's lots of local trains. So I try to give you a little sense of the lay of the land. There are questions, or this makes sense?
Yeah,
So this whole thing was formed quite recently in geologic time, 15 million years ago. This used to be attached to the Asian continent, and plate tectonics moved it out and made so the area was settled first mostly through Russia, coming down through walking across land bridges into this part into Japan, and later from the mainland of China or someplace, no one seems sure. And what's interesting is that the first wave had a very different tooth structure than the second wave. And the current Japanese population is kind of a unique blend of these two different genetic species. So Larissa, it's likely you don't have Japanese genes, but more likely the Japanese have your genes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was interesting to really find out through the
Yeah.
DNA analysis. Yeah.
And 73% of the land is mountainous. Only 80% of it's uninhabited. So almost everybody lives in a few big cities, Tokyo being the biggest city in the world. And it's got 108 active volcanoes, 10% of the world's total. And the Ring of Fire, you may be familiar with this, comes down right through here. So it's a very hazardous place to live between earthquakes, tsunamis, and floods because it rains like hell. Japan has 5 seasons. The rainy season starts in the middle of June. And I've been there. It just rains constantly for days on end. And with all this rain and all the mountains, you get flooding. So it's a geologically hazardous place to be. But the upside is that with all this volcanic activity, onsen or hot springs are just about everywhere. So the whole point of this trip was to stay in these Japanese inns called ryokans, which have two defining ingredients. One is they all have an onsen hot spring, and the second is that they all have this kaiseki dinner, which I'll talk a little more about later. So Japan's about the size of California with 126 million people. Yes, it's crowded, any place in the cities, and the wooded areas are basically impenetrable. There's places where there are castles protected by forest because you can't go through the forest. I'll show you pictures of this. The trees are so thick you can't move through them. So that's kind of the basic geologic and geographic picture of the thing. So in terms of my own experience with Japan, you may all know this, but I thought I'd put it down here anyway. I lived on Okinawa from 8 to 13 years of age. My father was there flying B-29 bombers during the Korean War. My mother packed up my brother and I in an old Chevrolet and drove from Louisiana to California, got on a troop carrier and sailed to Tokyo first and then Okinawa. And we lived on Kadena Air Force Base. And I've been back there recently and our house is still there, and realized that it's actually a very isolated thing in an Air Force base. But being there as a child, I really felt like I was in a strange country. The music on the radio was all Japanese music. We had Japanese live-in maid, another day maid, lots of contact with local people. So it was a very strange experience for me. And I didn't really, when I came back to the US, I was busy enough with all the difficulties of acclimating to a really different country that I'd grown up in. I didn't really pay much attention to thinking about my background in Japan. And by the way, at that time, it wasn't really Japan. It was administered by a US agency. But I went to Harvard Business School on a 16-week live-in program. And we studied with a 10-person CAN group. And this was quite a close group. We lived in a little unit together. We'd eat dinner together. We would meet about 10 o'clock at night, start drinking alcohol and work on our case studies till about 2 a.m. And I became very deeply connected to a Japanese guy there, Yuji Akita, who was from Yokohama, who was a banker. And I really liked this guy and ended up socializing most with the other 4 Japanese people there who were all big executives in Japanese companies. If I had known that I was going to have a training business, I would have done something differently. But there were big execs from all US companies there. I didn't bother with them. And then when I came back and became director of astrophysics, I wanted to find out why we weren't collaborating with the Japanese space program, and discovered that they had a program called ISAS, which was in Tokyo University, because that was the only allowed space program after the war. And I asked people why we weren't doing anything with Japanese, because we're doing things with almost every other country in the world. And the answer was, you can't work with these people. So I sought out my counterpart, Yasuo Tanaka, became very deep friends with him. He and I collaborated on a solar X-ray mission. For me, it was ideal collaboration because I provide the instruments, he provided the spacecraft and the launch vehicle. So my money was going into what I cared most about, the science program. And very successful mission. He got a medal from the emperor for this. And to thank me, he took me on a all expense paid trip around Germany after I retired from NASA. So
I've got a story here, Charlie.
go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, when I approached Charlie about when I was the director of astrophysics, I approached Charlie about taking the deputy's job, and he first thing he told me was he'd been approved to go to Harvard Business School and was going to be gone for, what was it, 3 months or 6 months, Charlie?
16 weeks, 4 months.
4 months. So it was 4 months, somewhere in between. And I said, I said, I don't care about that. You go on to Harvard Business School, just be here when I leave, because whoever's in that deputy slot's going to have that job, and I want it to be you. And so this really brought that back. That's interesting.
Nice. Thank you. So, so then I retired from NASA, and what I was concerned about was it's expensive to travel in Japan, because when I first went there, I stayed in like the Okura Hotel, US style hotels. I figured out after a while, with my help from Yasuo, that you can stay in business hotels that are quite reasonable. And the thing that they did that I really liked was take me, that was my introduction to these ryokans, these Japanese inns. And they knew that what I liked most was to go to a Japanese inn, never had foreigners before. And you could only do that with Japanese people. So I moved to Boulder, and I'm thinking, how am I going to reconnect with Japan? And a lady I was dating for a while, connected me to a woman who was the chairman of the Boulder Yamagata Friendship Society. And she didn't want to keep the job anymore, so I became president of the society just like overnight, and linked up with a Japanese ladies traveling club. So Japan is really more like the US in the 50s than anything else.
Yeah.
The men work all day, especially the ones that work in Tokyo, and they go out drinking at night, and so they're never home. And when the children leave home, the women have nothing to do, and Japanese people are very interested in learning, so they love to travel. So I joined this club, and I'm traveling around Japan doing homestays with them. This was ideal because I'm staying with people for free, and they're coming to stay with me in Boulder. And I really enjoyed being with these married women. I didn't quite know what it was about them, but I really liked their company. And then I decided, it's a longer story, that my wife-to-be was going to be in Japan. So I moved to Yamagata and lived there for 3 months. And when I was there as the Friendship Society, people couldn't do enough for me, were all around talking with me. I didn't realize when I went back without my Japanese American handlers, they really were too concerned about their English to be bothered. So this ended up looking like a disaster. I counted on my friends from the Japanese companies to fix me up with ladies, which is part of their job. And they did, and we had a lunch with a third party, them, and very nice ladies, and said, gee, it's great to meet you, and let's have lunch again next month. And I realized with 3 months of time in my visa, this was not going to work. So I basically gave up and went to Okinawa to visit my old house. And before I left, I went and met with the president of the club, and she said her daughter has tickets to an Up With People concert in Tokyo that I want to go. I stayed at her house for several days and went to this thing, and met her daughter's friend who lived in Hokkaido, and talked with them a lot. And they decided Junko was my wife-to-be, and Junko wanted no parts of it. So my friend's daughter's friend tricked Junko into meeting me in Boulder, and we spent a week here, fell in love, and this year's our 25th wedding anniversary. But on this trip, I got a lot of insight, I think, because I had more time to think about this and prepare than I usually would. And I got what I've really liked at the core of Japanese society. They are hardwired to avoid making others feel uncomfortable. Always knew they were a caring society, but it's bigger than that.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was, in 2 different onsens, there was a sign on the wall that said, if you have tattoos, you cannot enter this onsen unless you can cover them up, because someone might feel uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And Junko and I were in a ryokan with the stairs in Japan are steep, 45-degree stairs, because space is always a premium. And there was an old woman coming down the stairwell struggling with a suitcase, and there was only one handrail on the stairwell. She saw us waiting at the bottom, and she moved off the handrail to let us have the handrail to come up, even though she's coming downstairs with a big suitcase. And Junko and I were in a,
Charlie.
yeah, go ahead.
No, I don't want to interrupt this story. I just want to, before you move on from Junko's story, I will always be the witness or to want to testify that it's the most inspiring story to me, even more than the Hubble itself.
Okay, thank you.
Before we move on.
Thank you. And I was in an executive lounge in Hokkaido some years ago, and the manager came up and said, I knew him. He said, I have a request, please. Could you, next time you come, not wear your slippers in the executive lounge? In the US, you would get something like, it's against the rule to wear slippers, go change them. In his case, it was like, next time you come, can you not do this, please? Now, on this trip, Junko and I were in a museum where there were signs posted you could not take photographs of certain things, and she was ignoring them. And the lady came up to her and spoke in Japanese and looked to me like she's just saying, glad to see you, hope you're having a good time in this museum. What she was saying is, could you please not take photographs of these things where the sign's posted? So this whole idea, and by the way, Junko often talks about, this makes me feel uncomfortable. I never got that this is much bigger than caring about people. It's about not avoiding making others uncomfortable. And I've often said that you can tell a lot about social context with how people drive. And in Japan, people who drive go out of their way to let people into traffic. And you say thank you by turning on your emergency blinker for 2 blinks. It's just a really amazing society. And I'll tell you how I think this happened. Comments or questions on all this? So if you ask Japanese people when something happened, they will talk about the era. They don't think in terms of dates, they think about eras. And starts with the Paleolithic era. People either walked or came by boats. And I talked about this first from Russia, then the South with different teeth structure. And they've been there since maybe 40, 50,000 BCE. That comes from bone fragments and caves and rocks. And then the next period was Jomon. And this is important because I'm going to show you a bunch of images from the Jomon period. This was about 13,000 to 1,000 BCE. The name comes from corded pottery. And these were sedentary societies. They weren't mobile, hunter-gatherers. We think this may have been some of the best time to live in the country. Life was fairly straightforward. They built these houses I'll show you later, and hunted game and planted some little crops. Next was the Yoi period, and this was about 1000 BCE to 250 AD, and dramatic population rise and rice cultivation. Rice cultivation is really central to the whole story because rice is incredibly difficult to raise. The labor to raise a grain of rice is maybe 10 or 100 times more than to do a grain of wheat. You've got to start by getting the rice grains growing during the wintertime in a little greenhouse. You got to plant these in a rice paddy. The rice paddy's got to be turned over, cultivated, and it's typically in like 2 or 3 inches or 4 inches of water. And these are everywhere. I mean, if there's a piece of flat ground, it's a rice paddy. And even with all that, Japanese can't grow enough rice and for their consumption. And they really love rice. And on this trip, I got to love rice like I never have. It's in Japan, they'll talk about where it came from. It's very different depending on different regions, the quality of the water. Of course, water is very plentiful there. And these fields are incredibly level over very large scales. And I think most of them are maybe 2,000 or 3,000 years old. So you're looking at 1,000-year-old plantings of the rice. And people like Jared Diamond said this is the reason that Asians do so well in US universities, that they learn hard work just to survive on rice over the years, and also metallurgy. So next is the Kofun period. And this was unification across southern Japan. So Tohoku has always been kind of isolated for two reasons. One, it's extremely mountainous. And two, the west coast gets a bazillion tons of snow in the winter as the wind comes over the Japan Sea and drops it. Aomori, where we went during this trip on the second day, I think it's the snowiest city in the world. I'll show you more about that. And this is when Japan got recognition by China, and they built with the centralized government these gigantic burial mounds that you can go see, kind of like the scale of pyramids, but just dirt. The big event here is Buddhism comes. Japanese had Shinto religion before, and there's about equal numbers of Shinto temples and Buddhist temples in Japan. Shinto temples and Buddhist, Shinto shrines and Buddhist temples in Japan. And the Confucian code of conduct came, and a Japanese senior official sent a note to China and said, "Welcome from the land of the rising sun to those people in the land of the setting sun." That became the symbol of Japan, and the reason is it's the first Asian country that gets sunlight every morning.
Mhm.
And Japan is known as Nihon to Japanese, which translates as land of the rising sun. And Buddhism had a dramatic effect on Japan, very widely adopted.
Where did the Buddhism come from, Charlie?
India through China through Korea, about the year 500.
Okay, so the Buddhism was in China, India, then Korea, then Japan. Is that the way?
But it took foothold in Japan like no place else.
Got you.
It blended in with the government, and they wrote a Confucian code of conduct, and they actually had their first constitution was written around Buddhist principles, Zen Buddhism, and the Buddhists are still active to this day. The kaiseki dinner that I talk about came from Buddhism. So Buddhist monks are very aesthetic. They don't eat much. And about the 16th century, the tea ceremony became very important. This is a thing where you take matcha powdered tea and whisk it in a little bowl, and it's a very ritualized thing. And the monks believed that you couldn't enjoy the tea if you were too hungry. So they made a little meal called kaiseki to help you reduce your appetite and enjoy the tea more. And that got expanded about 100 years later into a major meal, which well, one of the two big things here is the kaiseki dinner and the onsen. By the way, so here's a typical day for us. Get up about 6:30, about 7 we go to the onsen, and the onsen is a bath. I preferred the outdoor version, which was just in rocks, but has like a swimming pool thing inside that's shallow enough when you sit, the water comes kind of up to your chin. And the water's pouring in from the mountain through a little waterfall and constantly exchanging. So what you do is that the Japanese, that they can't imagine sitting in your own scum and soap in a bathtub. So what you do is you go to a little stool, sit down with a handheld sprayer, spend about 15 minutes making your body as clean as it's ever been. And you sit on the stool because that lets you wash your feet, your legs, everything. When you're all completely clean, you have a little washcloth that you have, and you don't want to even, so you rinse that out in a little tub in front of you, but it might have some residual soap. You don't want that to get in the onsen water, because the onsen water should be pure. And so everybody puts the washcloth on their head. So people are sitting in the tub with these white cloths on their head. And what's interesting is that the place is very private. Even though men are all walking, everybody's walking around naked. It's impolite to look at people, and it's impolite to have conversation. You're really in there with other people. And by the way, there are typically only 2 or 3 people in the thing with me, and the main pool is like size of a swimming pool, and sometimes there's 3 or 4 of them in different temperatures. So anyway, and then came this big imperial court introduction of Kana, which was the first real separation from China. So Japan uses these kanji characters to read and write. And I'm really wish that I had been raised to understand these because in English, we make letters and make sounds. And we take the sound and make a word, then interpret the word. The kanji are all images. So I can read some of them. I can read mountain, I can read middle, I can read about 20 of them. And when you read a kanji, you're not making a word sound, you're making an image in your mind. And Japanese will tell you that they read kanji much faster than they read sonic languages. But anyway, so they made this thing called hiragana, which is about 40 characters, and I can sort of read that. And that's kind of like English letters. And then when they got foreign language in, they made a thing called katakana, a whole separate set of letters for loan words. And if you can read those, you can probably guess what the word is because it's a foreign word. So for example, and they contract everything. So personal computer is persicon. If you the kanji, the katakana character, you can read it and sound it out. Or convenience store is conveni, camping gear is kampu, so forth. So this invention of this first phonetic language, and so a typical sentence in Japanese will have hiragana, which is their sonic language like our alphabet, katakana, which is a different set of characters for foreign words, kanji, of which you need a Japanese typical person knows 4,000, and then romaji, which is Roman letters, all in one sentence. So reading over there is completely impossible for foreigners. Anyway, the invention of this alphabet was their first real departure from China. Never looked back. Then feudal Japan. The Mongols successfully invaded Japan twice, once in 1274 and once in 1281 out of China. And they were on the beach and they had landed and they were defeating the samurai. In both cases, a typhoon came and sunk their ships. So with their ships gone, the Japanese annihilated them. And this came up with the term kamikaze, which means divine wind. Kami is God and kaza is wind. And you would think they would have figured out after they lost in 1274 to avoid the typhoon season, but apparently they didn't. This gave a big rise to Shinto. Shinto is kind of this spiritual belief in nature. So Shinto boomed because the Japanese thought that their tributes to Shinto is what saved them from invasion. So the only country I know of never been occupied by a foreign power until the U.S. after World War II. And I'll talk more about why that happened. Another big event is a Portuguese trading ship shipwrecked on Tanegashima. I've actually been there. That's where their launch site is. And it brought two important things, Christianity and the musket. And the Japanese started to manufacture the muskets and found there was a part they couldn't make. So they went to the Portuguese guy and said, I'll give you my daughter if you'll show me how to make this part. And he said, I don't know how to make the part. Let me go find out. He came back a year later, and now they allowed foreigners to come into Tanegashima, that and Yokohama, the only places, and showed them how to make the part. And Japanese had more muskets than any country on earth in less than 2 or 3 years. So now they're fighting their little wars with these warlords called, the name momentarily here, daimyo, with muskets. So then the next big event, and this to me is what really shapes Japan to this day, is a guy named Issei Tokugawa became shogun. So all during this time, these warlords were fighting. It's kind of like these are states. It'd be kind of like Texas versus Mexico, or if Maryland had an army fighting, Virginia or something. And Tokugawa came in and with some good luck, took over the whole country. And the way he maintained control was the daimyo were all required to keep family in Kyoto. So he had their wives and children in one central place. And if they misbehaved, they were gone. So the daimyo were controlled by him. 250 years of isolation and peace. And if you look at any the videos of the dramas, they're all the Edo period. Imagine what it would be like in the US if we had 250 years with no military, no nothing. So this is the period where the caste system was rigorously enforced, and I'll show you that in a minute. But this is where the samurai ruled the store. If you misbehave, they pull out the sword and chop your head off. And so this is why the society is what it is today. They learned to be sort of peacefully obedient and to care for each other during this. So without this, in my opinion, is the society would not be what it is. That's the defining event of Japan. Thoughts or questions or comments? Is this interesting?
Yep.
Yeah, I would like to know that the musket. Can you just explain a bit more? I don't have an idea what it is.
Oh, just a gun.
Rifle.
A
It's
gun.
Rifle,
Okay.
it's a rifle without a repeating cartridge. It's what Americans used when we fought the British. It's a breech loaded rifle. So
I got it.
it's got a typically like maybe a flint and a spark.
Yeah. And not very accurate. That's why
No,
they all
that's right. No,
shot at each other.
it's not a very
Mm.
compared to a modern rifle. It's kind of
No.
not much. But so this is in a nutshell the country, and then the Meiji period, which started. It's a misprint. It started in 1868, not 1968. What happened is that Tokugawa. So Christianity was making a foothold in Japan, and Tokugawa was aware of the fact that the Portuguese and Spanish were were taking over, colonizing other countries. And the way they were doing it is with Christianity. So he made Christianity illegal and punishable by death. And so the country isolated completely for 250 years. And in 1868, Commodore Perry sailed in to Yokohama Bay with these modern warships with these big cannons, and terrified the Japanese, and they realized that he demanded they open the country. And why, I'm not sure, but anyway, the US decided they wanted to access Japan. And that began modernization. And the interesting thing was that in the West, they talk about the Meiji Restoration, and until this trip, I always wondered how they managed to make this major political transition. By the way, the samurai, who had been kind of the ruling class until this happened, became unemployed overnight, and they revolted. And there was northern Japan, even though Tokugawa relinquished his command to the emperor, northern Japan remained loyal to Tokugawa, even though he didn't ask for it. They fought a civil war called the Bushin War. The North lost, and the people then migrated to Hokkaido, which is why Hokkaido became populated about 1850. So this was modernization, and no one could believe.
Charlie?
Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. I just want to, before you carry on, you know me, but I always pick up those things that Meiji, that date should probably be 1868.
It's a mistake. I said earlier, it's 1868.
I missed that, sorry.
So, the country modernized at a rate no one could imagine. And part of the reason for this is that they had allowed the Dutch to trade with them. And the reason is the Dutch were just pure merchants. So back to money, Frank. It's just about
Right.
money.
It's all, I was thinking about that as you're going through this whole thing.
It wasn't about Catholicism or anything. Dutch just money. And they got a lot of Dutch textbooks and started to read them and understand. So they were sort of poised for this. And what Junko believes is the biggest tragedy for the country is in 1905, they waged war with Russia, with England as an ally, and sunk the Russian Navy. And this led to this period of militarization. If they had not successfully done that, they might not have invaded Manchuria and all the other stuff that led to World War II.
Yeah.
Anyway, then the Toshio period, 1912 to 1926, and they were allied with the US during World War I, and they gained some colonies and decided They saw England with colonies, Spain with colonies, all the European, and said colonies are a good idea. That's when they decided to go and take over China and Manchuria and Philippines, and led FDR to declare war on them, forced them into war. Then the Showa period, this was the
Here's some
recent
options
emperor.
showing on Living Room 2 TV. Which one would you like?
Hey, none. I'm sorry, somebody, you activated my.
Okay. So-
She thought you were talking to
Yeah,
her.
the Showa period, the first occupation by a foreign government. So in a nutshell,
Which one would you like?
this ancient period, the Jomon, we got lots of things to show you about that. The feudal area, we're gonna show you a lot about that. That was very big in Sendai where we went. Edo period, I think, is the crucible of the whole culture. The Meiji Restoration led to modernization, so forth. So I thought some context about this. When I go through, we'll be looking at, Mon, feudal Japan, and a little bit of the Edo. So that's kind of the history of the country in a nutshell.
Charlie,
Yeah.
little, the disruption you had, apparently Shohei is, or however you pronounced it, triggers, it's like, hey, Google.
Okay. I see.
And that's what happened,
Okay,
because she
okay.
responded twice when you said that
Yeah,
word.
okay.
I have another aside before you get off of this
Yeah,
chart,
yeah.
since we have some folks that didn't necessarily grow up in this country and maybe take US history. You're talking about the Mongols and their invasions being destroyed by the typhoons or whatever it was going on over there. We had a similar experience here in the Revolutionary War when Cornwallis, the British general, and his troops were cornered down at Yorktown in 1781. It turns out that the battles, the U.S. and with French allies, had them pretty much surrounded at Yorktown, September 28th to October 19th. And the U.S. Soldiers, the U.S. Army sent a request through the French for some support from the French Navy, which happened to be down in the Caribbean during hurricane season. And so what they decided to do was they'd be better off if they just came up and confronted the British before they basically came down from New York and took Cornwallis's troops out of harm's way. And so, in a sense, that battle, and that was the final major battle of the Revolutionary War, swung on the fact of at least somebody understood bad weather and made a different choice. So
Great.
interesting stuff.
Thank you. Is this a good picture for everybody, kind of the overview of the history?
I knew little or nothing about most of this, so great, thanks.
Yeah, it's always good to have like this summary and an overall picture.
This may not
Yeah, I
be
don't know.
exactly right.
I'm not gonna.
This is my version of this, but I think it's pretty close. And I wanted you to, when we go into the trip, you'll see parts of this showing up. So, and this is the caste system. The emperor was the head of Japanese society, but had little real power. Even to this day, the emperor is more like the Queen of England kind of a thing. We visited a very early elementary schoolhouse, and there was a little place in there by the front, a little room. And I'm pretty sure when the students, elementary school students came in, they did a bow to this thing of the emperor. So it's kind of like the figurehead, and the shogun was actually the boss, Tokugawa being the main one. And these daimyo were the kind of like, that'd be the equivalent of governors today, except they each had their own army like the National Guard. And Tokugawa kept them in line for 250 years. The samurai were the mainstay of everything. They were the warriors. And in fact, and they were completely loyal to the daimyo or the shogun. The daimyo, could think of them as warlords. If their daimyo got killed, they would commit seppuku, which is disembowelment. And they would be beheaded by another samurai to take them out of their pain. So these were sort of like the enforcers of everything, the samurai. The largest class was the peasants and artisans, And being a farmer or an artisan was fairly high in the caste system. People realized food was important. And during this Edo period, I think this is when Japan became craftspeople. They are to this day. That's why no one can compete with Japanese cameras. Japanese swords are still probably the best in the world. On and on and on, the pottery, everything, and the farmers. The lowest class was the merchants. And this is because they didn't produce anything. So this would be where Donald Trump would be today as a real estate guy. He'd be a lower class merchant. And Frank, I know you and I have talked about this, about elements of our society, like the financial people in New York City don't make anything for anybody.
Right.
So this was rigorously enforced. I think you could move between classes, but if you looked the wrong way at someone, the samurai felt free to chop your head off. So it was a very, so I've been thinking about what's the problem with South Africa and Nelson Mandela, and I think that he was only green. And Japan got this thing about being green, about so extreme that you worry about making other people uncomfortable, even when you're driving the
Mhm.
car. But they backed it up with rules. And I've even got a photograph of going into a museum. Here's the 15 rules. So they balanced off the green with orange. And to this day, our household runs on rules, trust me. There are Junko's rules and you do not disobey them except at your peril. And so this idea of balancing the green with lots of orange enforced by the samurai is why I think the society was so successful.
Mhm.
They had the diagonal elements of the two things that really matter most, caring about other people and having systematic controls over behaviors. So that's kind of my hypothesis about why Mandela's party is failing. They didn't get the orange right, the power system, that kind of thing. So Japan works. Everything. If I've been on trains where there was an apology for the train leaving 15 seconds late.
Mhm.
And by the way, the conductor comes out and bows. And by the way, the bowing is everywhere all the time. And bowing is basically goes back to the samurai, meaning if I'm doing something wrong, chop my head off. The bowing is the place of extreme vulnerability. Also, I've talked a lot about the power of gestures, and Japanese master this. The hand gestures for everything are just amazing. So it's impolite to point. So if you want to go someplace, they'll put their arm out with their hand.
Mhm.
So, and when you get a hotel bill, you never touch directly any person. They'll take with two hands and put the bill down respectfully in a little plastic tray. You pick it up and read it, you put their money in the tray, they pick the money out of the tray. So all this is done in a very disciplined, polite way. And the worst insult you can bestow upon a Japanese person is you're selfish. That's the worst thing it could be. I was thinking about your example with the lady in the mask, Frank. That's just selfishness. Okay.
Mhm.
So that's the overview of the country and sort of setting up the trip. So comments, questions, thoughts?
No, it just reminds me that Trump just wants to be orange and be the emperor.
He wants to be the emperor. He wants to be the king, and he wants to empower the daimyo to do his dirty deeds.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, the Bruce Springsteen song that has a lyric in it that says, poor men want to be rich and rich men want to be kings. And that's
that's
pretty
it.
much
Yeah.
how it works sometimes. It's that simple.
So just to close this out, I'll show a few photographs. I've got obviously hundreds and hundreds of photographs of this, but I thought just to get a little bit of feel for the place. So the first night we stayed in a Japanese business hotel in
Mm,
Akita. So I
nice.
just took a little photo of kind of what a Japanese business hotel looks like. This is just a wall decoration. And this is your typical, our house is decorated the same way with this light wood everywhere. And it's kind of how it looks. And here we are getting the rental car, and Junko and I are having trouble figuring out how to work parts of the car. So the rental car lady comes out and sits in the car with us for about half an hour explaining things. I don't think this would happen in the US. I don't know. It would not be usual. And when she got unsure about something, the boss came out. So they probably spent 30, 45 minutes with us, how to work the GPS, how to plug things in. It was a Corolla hybrid, kind of like your car, Frank, but a
Mhm.
newer version. And a fine car. This is a convenience store. The convenience stores are everywhere. They're in the cities, like there's one every 2 or 3 blocks. And they sell food, but most interestingly for us, you can go in there and you can buy, this is shochu. This is 40% Japanese alcohol. This is osake here. So you go in here and you can buy beer, sake, shochu, as you like. You can get beer out of vending machines. So Junko and I would go in here and buy a bottle of shochu, and sometimes in a milk carton. That
Mhm.
lasts us about a week of drinking every night, and cost $10. Driving down the road, they had safety's everything. So they drive at the same speed as the US except in kilometers. So you're driving down a typical highway at 50 kilometers, that's 35 miles an hour. Junko says she feels like she's in a parking lot. We're going so slowly. And the reason is safety. The Japanese will not trade speed for safety. And things like this is a major highway.
Yeah.
This is a barrier so you can't run into other cars. And the speed limit here is 80, which is 48 miles an hour. So you're walking down a toll road at 48 miles an hour. Of course, everyone speeds there, just like in the US, about 10 miles over. But everything's kind of in slow motion.
Hmm.
And this is a used bookstore. Japanese recycle things. And this is right next to it, a whole shop called the reuse shop. So to them, throwing something away that someone can use doesn't make any sense. And that's kind of how Junko and I live as well. This is interesting. These are the ubiquitous rice paddies. By the way, the rice doesn't need to be in water. The reason it's in water is it makes it much easier to control the weeds.
Mhm.
And these are windscreens. I've never seen this on the side of a road, but I'll show you later. There are these light cars called K cars and K trucks, and they're very narrow and very light. And I think the wind can blow those cars over. So when it gets windy, these screens come down. This is a road station.
I've never heard
These,
of that.
go ahead, Nico.
No, I just said I've never heard of that or thought about it.
The-
That you will see something like that.
These are
It's
everywhere
amazing.
too. These are called road stations. And they're named kind of after train stations. And typically there's Junko looking at a sightseeing map. This is actually mushroom growing stuff for home growing. And these are like $5 a bag. You can buy this in the US for about $200. And
Mhm.
this is local vegetables, and here's who grew it. So that's their family name. So everyone puts their name on what they put. So this family grew this, and so you know who did it. This is buckwheat. The Japanese love soba noodles, which are made with buckwheat. So that's very popular. We're driving along the coast, and to me, it's just staggeringly beautiful coastline. And this was a kind of unusual looking mountain. Guy fishing. This is the Sea of Japan side. Windmills over here. The wind blows like hell all the time.
Mhm.
And this was a World Heritage Natural Site. That's a picture in another road station. And this, I have no idea what this is about, going over the road like this. This is about this tree, the Japanese beach. And look at this thing, you can't walk through here. So it's impenetrable for all practical purposes. I mean, you could take a chainsaw and start to make your way through this, but look how closely spaced these trees are. You can't walk in here. And the thickness of the vegetation everywhere was just amazing. This is, so Junko and her mother would go up in the mountains many, many times and collect wild plants for food. And when we were in national parks, there's cars on the side of the road and people are going in there, and her mother understood what was good to eat, and Junko likes these elephant eared things. And so it's common in Japanese to go forage in the woods in the forest for food, and it's just delicious stuff. And they get like 10 different kinds of things, and her mother knew what was good to eat from, I guess, parents.
How do you prepare that elephant ear? Is it you chop it up and cook it or
Chop it up and boil it. Yeah.
boil it? Okay.
Again, the enormously beautiful coastline. And this, unfortunately, the LEDs were blinking faster than my camera's shutter speed.
Mm.
I got a kick out of this. This is a place where you're stopping for some construction. This is the guy standing, and when he's good to go, he bows. So
Hmm.
get this bowing figure waving at you. Look at this greenery.
Hmm.
I mean, it encroached on the road. Sometimes you had to steer around it. So we went into this place, Junico Lakes, which I didn't realize. I picked it because it was like Junko Lakes. I didn't realize Junico was 12. Anyway, so there was this little sign that said Canyon 0.5 kilometers, and we had time. So we try and arrive at the Rokon about 4 or 5 o'clock. So I went up this, and it's like 45 minutes of this. And there's what it was at the end. So some Japanese people came down and said it's Japan's Grand Canyon. It's interesting.
Okay.
And Frank, here's me playing with the rule of threes photography. Move
Oh.
it over to the side.
No, I got you.
This was the sign that led us to go up this hill. And it was not, if it was 0.5 kilometers, it was 0.5 kilometers straight line, but it was about an interminable uphill climb.
Hmm.
Nearby lake. Sake.
That looks like a commercial, Charlie.
This is a kaiseki dinner.
Mhm.
This is what they're like. And usually the food is either out here all at once or it comes in servings. This is lotus root and shrimp, and this is a seaweed in a vinaigrette sauce. This little some kind of vegetable thing. That's a vegetable thing. This is Amori apple juice. The place is famous for apples. This is, of course, sashimi. That's maguro. There's some taco, some maybe, I don't know, hamachi. A little, this is pickled daikon. This is some kind of little thing. This is a sea snail. Here's some saba, which is Spanish mackerel. Little thing, probably chawan, which is egg custard with probably seafood in it. And very typically, some you're going to cook on your tray. They light this up, and this has got an abalone. This is the peak thing of the meal.
Mm.
When this lights up, the abalone starts flopping around. It's alive. This is another similar thing. And this is looking into, these are edamame beans with some kind of stuff. And again, the sea snail, sashimi. And a big deal was planning around sunset. So they had a big sign, I'll show you that in a minute, of this. And this is the menu. So of course I can't read it, but Japanese reads downward left to right. I mean, right to left. So there's the first course, second course, third course. And Junko would read this and would eat the things in order. You can see it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, 17 courses. And the last course is always rice and miso soup, because if you're still hungry, you can fill up on the rice.
I
There
don't
it is.
know how you could be still hungry.
I know. There's the abalone, which of course is expensive thing.
Mhm.
This is salmon eggs on some chopped egg noodles and some nori. That's seaweed on some gohan, which is the rice. That's a soup. Probably that's soba noodles. This is how bed's set up in the room. So while we're at dinner, they come in and take the bed out of cabinets in the room. The typical room has a tatami mat. This is woven grass, and you don't wear anything but you can't put any shoes or anything, wear bare feet or socks in here. And typically a Western style into the room. So this is the Japanese table they moved out of the way for our bed. These are the Japanese chairs that you sit on the floor with. Little air conditioner here, ocean view here, and the bed here. So in the morning, you just roll it up and leave it. The maids come in, put the bed, change the sheets, put the bed back in the wall cabinets. And the only thing about this is that it's not easy to get up from the floor and go to the bathroom in the night. And of course, the toilet's in a separate room always with separate slippers. So you go into the toilet area. This is the view out the window of our room. This was breakfast. This was an automatic rice dispenser. So you push the button here about how much rice you want and put a dish under here, it dispenses the rice. That's kind of cool. And this is like 1/4 of what's there for breakfast. You eat it above, often breakfast is buffet style, not always. And this is my tray. This is sashimi. This is a fish egg, soy sauce, and I don't remember, but I think another fish thing. That's what I picked for breakfast. Junko's tray, she picked the same fish egg, this seaweed, some fish. She's got some kind of porridge here. This is kind of a tofu thing and some kind of a soup thing. This was on
Can I
the
quickly ask you a favor? Just go back to that view outside the room. I
yeah.
thought I saw something there. Okay, no, that's fine. Thank you.
So there was
Fine.
there were two main onsen in this particular ryokan. One that they suggested we try, which was outdoors, was just off the screen here. And we had to put on our slippers, go down a flight of stairs, change to a different slipper for the elevator, take the elevator down, change to a different slipper to go outdoors, go down some stairs. And this being an old-fashioned inn, had one place for women only, the other for mixed. So Junko came in to me with the mixed area. And the women who didn't want to be seen naked had kind of a tent dress they wore. So Junko was in there with kind of a tent dress with about half a dozen men who were all naked. And and so and there was about 4 or 5 other women, they're all wearing this kind of tent dress. And this beautiful babe comes down with her boyfriend. And I'm sort of looking over that way, and Junko said, "Don't look." It's okay. So, and so the men, when they're out of the water, are supposed to kind of keep their little washcloth covering their genitals. But the whole thing is you don't stare at anybody and you don't talk. Junko and I talked in there, but in general, the onsen is very private. It's a very strange thing. You're walking around with naked people, but nobody's paying any attention to anything. It would be considered very rude to stare or when the naked babe's there to even look at her. So I just looked away. So people deal with the nudity, but just not looking. That's kind of how you do.
Charlie,
Yeah.
can you go to that picture of bedroom setup you
Yeah.
showed? Yeah. I wish you would have like the whole sort of what is it? Is it on the floor or is
This is the floor. So this is that you have one room,
Mhm.
like a hotel room. And it's got, when you first come in, this table's in the center of the room here. And these
Mhm.
chairs are around the 4 sides of the table. And typically you can't see it very well, but they always have a thing of hot water and tea. And this is a little refrigerator over here. This is the air conditioner here. So you come in here and you can sit on the floor and eat, have your tea or whatever you want. And these aren't here. These are put away in wall cabinets.
Oh,
And so, and this section has Western style typically with Western style chairs and a Western style table. So if you're more comfortable to sit here, you can sit here. And this is the window, and in front of this is just the wall, the room where you come in.
mhm,
So there's I'm gonna call it an antechamber. When you enter the place, there's a floor that's and this is elevated up above that regular floor about 6 or 8 inches.
mhm,
So the elevation means you don't walk on this. This mat is very it's reeds of grass. It's very tender. So when you come in, this particular ryokan, we wore shoes to this ante room. Typically, you relinquish your shoes at the door, and you only wear slippers in the ryokan. And usually you wear your yukata, your robe, around. Nobody's walking around much in street clothes in the place, but you can if you want. Nobody cares. So you come into this antechamber that you can't see. I may have a picture of it later. And you take off your shoes there, and you would and the bathroom, the toilet's in a whole separate room always. The toilet's separate, usually with a sink, but sometimes with instead of that a thing on top of the toilet where the water that fills the toilet comes in. You can wash your hands there. So and the bathroom has separate slippers. So you're doing slippers all the time. So to go in the bathroom, put on the bathroom slippers, and you walk into rooms backward. So when you go, because when you want to come in, you want the slippers so you're facing forward. So you always back out of rooms. So I hope this helps, Larissa. But you come in and there's a door going into this room, another door going into the bathroom, which may or may not have a shower in it. Sometimes yes, sometimes no, and sometimes just a toilet and a sink. So that's the standard ryokan layout, and this is the sort of traditional area with sometimes has just pads on the floor. This particular one had these backjack chairs. They're not common, usually just a pad on the floor. You sit on the floor without any back support. You want to sit here, and then the western area over here. And when you're at dinner, they know you're eating dinner. So the maids come in and they take these beddings out of the wall cabinet. You put them on the floor. So this is why you sleep on the floor. So in the morning, you get up, kind of roll these out of the way. The junker would roll them out of the way. So our typical day, get up about 6:30 and go to the onsen at 7. And the onsen takes about an hour. You first spend 15 minutes washing your body sitting on a stool, and you're going to wash your body cleaner than it's ever been. You just thoroughly. And there's a handheld thermostatically controlled thing and lots of high pressure hot water. So you spray yourself, you shampoo your head, wash your body, then you go get in one of the typically there's an inside and outside pool, and the bigger ones will have like 3 or 4 pools of different temperature water. I don't know what the water temperature is, but I think it's probably about 102. The idea, and so you sit in there for maybe 20 minutes is all I could take. And what happens is that you dilate your blood vessels, lower your blood pressure, and relax. So when I get out of this thing, I'm almost having trouble standing up. I'm so relaxed. I would go back and sit on a little stool again and wash down with cool water to get my body temperature back down so I can stop sweating in the air. There's typically a fan in there. You can stand in front of the fan. There's typically counters where you can do a hair dry or things like that. And then, so that gets us to about 8 o'clock. We go eat breakfast, take 30-40 minutes, and then pack up and drive out. Different place every day, leave about 9 in the morning. Typically do sightseeing at 2 or 3 things, and then go to the next ryokan. So of the sort of 15 days, 17 days I was there, all but 3 were in ryokans. 3 were in regular hotels. One being the Westin and Sendai. And so we get there about 4:30, 2 or 3 sites, drive about 2 or 3 hours, go into the onsen before dinner, that'd get us to like 6. Have dinner at 6:30. And normally that they want to know when you want to have dinner, and they'll plan your meal. When you walk in the dining room, they're ready for you. And they have, usually it's mostly laid out like the photograph I showed you. And similar things, I was afraid we're gonna get tired of this kind of dinner, but they're actually quite different. And the Kaseki meal has all of the porcelainware is chosen for the season. It changes all the time, and everything is the first thing you eat is the freshest local food, and it's all designed for artistic appeal. May not come through in those pictures.
Oh, yeah.
And so then we come back to the room. By now it's like, I don't know, 7:38. We drink some sake or something for a while. I don't think we turned on a television the whole trip. I had a little computer I brought with me, a little Amazon Fire. I might check my email in the morning or check my email at night, but other than that, I may look at the New York Times, but I don't think we ever put the television on. Go to bed at 9 o'clock and get up again at 6:30 and do it again. And the later ryokans had beds. The early ones where you sleep on the floor, and you can order rooms with beds. And they could put beds on the tatami mat, but they put some pads so the bed feet don't mess up the tatami mat. And so the later things, one had a carpet floor. So with that case, I just walked in there with my slippers. By the way, I brought these little moccasins I use at home in the house, and wore those instead of their slippers. I found the slippers were treacherous going down these steep stairwells. So I brought my own little moccasins, and basically, the rule is don't make anybody uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So they don't bother you about things. The fact that I didn't wear their slippers, nobody ever commented on it, or probably even noticed. So this is traditional Japanese living, and the room is multi-purpose. So
And Charlie, this reminds me, looking at this reminds me of something, probably goes back 20 years. I don't know whether I was doing some work for you at Houston or for Lockheed prior to that. But I remember one time staying at a hotel in Clear Lake, right on the main road there, NASA Road 1, near the Johnson Space Center. And it was a Japanese style hotel, probably Japanese owned. And seeing these pictures reminded me of what those rooms look like. Now, I had a bed in it, but it was a small bed.
yeah,
And it was a small room. It wasn't the conventional sort of, if I'd stayed at the Hilton or one of the other places or the Holiday Inn down there, it wasn't anything like that. And I only stayed there once for several days when I was there, but I found it rather interesting, and these images remind me of it.
yeah. So I personally like the tatami mat. It smells like grass. It's very pleasant and it's soft. It's and by the way, all homes, all rooms in Japan are sized by how many tatami mats it is. So you ask somebody how big is the hotel room, they'll tell you it's 6 tatami mats.
Mhm.
Everything's sized, their standard size. And this is about, I'd say this was on the smaller side of our room. This is the standard layout with again, the merging of the traditional style and the Western style. So I can go sit on, there's a table back here you can't see. I could sit at this chair and work on my computer.
Mhm.
And so we didn't sit much at these tables. And what, again, when they come in the morning, they'll take these, change the sheets, put these back in a cabinet in the room and bring the table back. So when you walk into the room, and I got some pictures of that later, I think, you'll see just the table and the chairs. This was actually kind of a B grade ryokan. We stayed in two that were just profoundly wonderful. This was the first one, and Junko found these places. I'd never find these on US websites.
Charlie, I apologize. I have to get going.
Yeah.
The whole
I think-
family is waiting for me. So
I think-
welcome back home. We're really happy that you're back and you had an enjoyable trip. So thank you very much.
I think we've run over time anyway, so I'm gonna stop. Frank or Nico, any comments?
No, I enjoyed this. Thank you.
Lots of fun.
Yeah, just Larissa, keep well, take care. Is she gone already? I'm not sure.
Bye-bye.
Charlie, just from my side, maybe you already said something about that as well. But the bed on that level, I've noticed a difference. It feels like some difference in orientation on
Yeah.
my body on the long term if I have to sleep on the ground. Is there any research about that? What's better to be like the way in Western culture, the bed a bit higher, or anything like that that you guys know of?
I kind of like sleeping on the floor. It feels different to me. The only thing I would say is I don't like, it's more work to get up and go to the bathroom from the floor.
Yeah, I was about to say that as often as I get up in the middle of the night, I ain't doing this.
Yeah, that's-
No, I'd be crawling.
it's it's difficult. Plus, you're waking up, you've been drinking, it's middle of the night. And the bathroom's in another room, so what you gotta do is go back to this, when you enter the place, the bathroom, there's this platform where you start wearing your, to take off your slippers. And the platform has two doors, one into the room, which could be a big sliding door, and a second more regular door into the bathroom. So you gotta get up and find your way out of the regular room, this other room, and then put these slippers on and do your business, and then back out of the room, take the slippers back off. They can't be on the tummy mat, and walk back in your bare feet, get back in bed. So I preferred having the bed just for that reason. But I think sleeping on the floor is more natural. It's kind of like if you ever do camping, Nico, and the way it feels when you're out on the ground. I think it's probably a more natural way to sleep, being on the floor, because it's like how people slept since millennia. But the bed's a hell of a lot easier
Yeah.
to get up and down. That's the main. The main, I never understood why we have beds, but that's the reason. It's easier to get in and out.
That's right. Yeah.
And the height of beds is a height that's if you think about it, it's pretty natural to get out of the bed.
I've got a bad story for you that just to
Yeah.
kind of punctuate that about getting out of beds. Right after water beds became popular, I stayed at one of these motels in Pasadena when I was at the Jet Propulsion Lab, and I'd been out drinking with my buddy Kasani and Kane Kasani, and worked on the IRAS thing, and I came back and laid down on the bed. It felt great, it's a little bit of moving around, but it was before they figured out how to stabilize those things. So I got up to go to the bathroom, and I'm sitting on the edge of the bed. And what I didn't realize was that I'd created a wave which threw my ass in the floor.
A water bed?
A water bed,
Yeah,
and clearly they didn't have any kind of structure.
Yeah.
It's just a big tube full of water. And I said, well, I'm not doing that anymore.
Yeah.
I'm not the drinking, the water bed.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I kept doing the drinking. I just stayed away from the water bed.
Well, thank you guys for listening.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for doing that.
Well, yeah. Thank you. Appreciate it.
See you next time.
See you next week.